Okay, today is June the 5th, 2008, and I'm in Chelsea, Oklahoma at McSpadden and Associates office building. And my name is Karen Neurohr, and I'm with the OSU Library in Stillwater. And I'm here to interview some gentlemen for the O State Stories Oral History Project of the OSU Library. And right now I'm going to interview Mr. Larry Kilgore. Mr. Kilgore, thank you for coming today and participating in the interview.
My pleasure.
Okay, one of the things that I want to start with our interview is to find out a little bit about you and where you're from originally. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, from the beginning, actually I was born in Tucson, Arizona, because my father had been diagnosed with tuberculosis. And the only cure or hope for anyone who had the disease was to go to dry country. So my father was in Arizona. I was born on April the 13th, 1927. And he was not cured, but he was listed as an arrested case of TB and able to go home. So we moved out of Tucson, Arizona when I was 8 months old. Needless to say, I remember nothing. But we moved to a farm in southeast Missouri because my father needed fresh air and he was not able to have any difficult labor work. So we had a hired hand. And we also had some livestock, but mostly we had the horses that were worked in the fields and hogs. Well, this was by there we were about to 1929 when you could have the hogs, but the only thing you could do with them was eat them yourself because nobody could eat by them. And we struggled along there until Daddy came to Tulsa to work in his sister's husband's store. And we stayed on the farm till I was 5. A hired hand looked after me about as much as my mother did, but my mother was a very strict woman, so she knew where I was at all times, and mostly I was out at the barn. The hired hand used to sit me on Daddy's old buggy horse while he did the chores in the barn. The old horse was eating, and he knew I'd stay right there on that old horse. But we moved to Tulsa, and I didn't like the city life at all. I went back to Missouri every chance we had. And I fussed about wanting a horse my entire period of life. And when I was 10, well, my aunt finally bought me a horse. And then I had a horse from then on. When we brought the horse to Tulsa, we kept the horse at the fairgrounds. And on the fairgrounds, at the Tulsa Fairgrounds, there was an organization called the Tulsa Mounted Troops. And the boys roped calves. And they rode some bucking horses that people would bring in for them to ride. And they were a bunch of city boys who really wanted to be country boys or cowboys. And some of them were quite polished calf ropers. And therefore I wanted to be one. And my father was a little reluctant for me to join this organization because I guess I was about 13 at that time. And these boys were from 15 to 20. And Daddy wasn't sure that I ought to be playing around with a bunch of old teenagers. But one day I was sitting on my horse with my rope. I had been taught how to tie the knots in my lariat rope and how to throw a lariat rope. And I had the lariat rope on my saddle, and I was watching these boys rope, and one of them rode by after he had roped, and he said, "Do you want to chase a calf?" And I said, "Yes." He said, well, come on back. Well, his father was the rodeo announcer. And he put my name on the roping list. So I rode around behind the chutes and they called my name. First time I'd ever heard it over a loudspeaker. And I chased a calf. And I thought, boy, that was fun. I don't know whether I could rope one or not, but that was sure fun. I had a horse that actually followed the calf, and I don't recall whether it was that week, but I was considered a member. And I was on the roping list every week, and it wasn't long till I roped a calf. And I had no idea what to do about it. I knew I was supposed to get off and throw him, but I didn't know how, and I wasn't all that big. So this fella that had asked me first if I wanted to chase one, he jumps over the fence, comes out, shows me how to throw the calf, and shows me how to tie the calf. So needless to say, I had a ideal in that gentleman. And the war came along shortly. I think I was 14 when the war started. And these boys, every one of them went into service. Most of them sold their horses. And I was in I thought it was a wonderful position because I still had a roping horse. And each time any of them would come home on a leave, we would rope someplace. So I got real close to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Harold Emery was one of them who comes up quite often in our conversations. He was stationed in Monroe, Louisiana as a tower operator at the airport, the Air Corps airport. And he got to come home about every 6 weeks. And he was roping in Monroe, Louisiana all this time. Harold come home and we would go to jackpot ropings. And as time wore on, the war was still going on when I became 18. And as Clem said, neither one of us wanted to get in the Army because there was a lot of walking. Mm. And so I joined the Navy. Well, I've forgotten just when Germany gave up, but the Japanese part of it was still going on when I joined. And I went to boot camp at Great Lakes and went overseas. I was going overseas the day Japan surrendered. Hmm. I thought surely they won't send me overseas now, the war's over, but they did. Hmm. I discovered there was reason for that because I relieved a man on a ship who had been on that ship for 5 years. Hmm. And I really felt my efforts were justified. So I stayed over there for a little over 11 months and then discharged in 46, August of 46. And the girl that I was in love with and had been since I was 15, which is another story, but I got a buggy for my 15th birthday. Well, I had also had a harness, and my horse worked well wherever I put him. And I put the harness on my horse and drove the buggy around. And the summer that I was 15, I was headed across town to take a girl for a buggy ride. And one of my close friends was with me, and he said, do you mind going a block out of our way here? I have a cousin who would really be impressed with seeing this. I know, I hate this old horse on this pavement. I hate to keep him on it all day, but I thought that won't hurt anything. So we went over by, and I met this cousin of my dear friend, and she was cuter than a bug. It was summertime. She was barefooted, had on shorts, and naturally she wanted to go for a buggy ride. And I said, well, I'm headed over across town, and the pavement's real hard on my horse's feet. If you want to ride a block or two down the street with us, and if you want to walk back, we certainly could do that. That suited her. So she got in the buggy and was just enjoying it immensely. And we went about 3 or 4 blocks, and I said, remember, I'm not going to take you back. You have to walk back. She looked back over her shoulder and thought, well, all right, this is far enough. So she got out of the buggy, and I remember looking over my shoulder, and here's this real cute girl running across the hot pavement to the grass, across a driveway to the grass, across a sidewalk to the grass. And I thought, that's a sorry thing you've done, making that poor girl go home barefooted on that hot pavement. But I went on over. Well, the girl I picked up in the buggy acted like she had been for a buggy ride every day of her life. So I didn't take her but about a half a mile, and I turned around and took her back home. And then I had all this time to think about what I had done to that cute girl going back across town to the fairgrounds. So the next day I hustled back over to her house to see if she thought it was as bad as I did, and she thought nothing of it. So she was really the first girl I was ever around that I was real comfortable with. And so the next spring, I invited her to go to the rodeo. I was roping. And we went out to the rodeo, and I roped. After the rodeo, we took care of the horse. We went to a restaurant and had something to eat, and I got her home about 1:30. Her mother was not happy about this at all. So I had another big challenge, was to make this mother think I was all right. And anyway, that's the same girl that I married. When I came home from service, she had me enrolled in school at Stillwater. Mm-hmm. I had spent a year thinking about how I was going to rodeo for a year and then go to school. Mm-hmm. She had plans for me to go to school, and she had me enrolled. Mm-hmm. So we went to school. I took my horse. I knew I could keep him at the fairgrounds. Mr. Blue, I had been to a rodeo at Stillwater before at the fairgrounds. And I knew I had a place for the horse. I didn't have a place to live, but I knew the horse was all right. Mm-hmm. And I don't exactly remember where I slept the first night while I was in Stillwater.
What year was this?
46.
46, okay.
And, but anyway, I ran into a cowboy who was a bareback rider, and he said he had a room in a house and that I was certainly welcome to stay with him. So I did. For about a week. And then by then, a close friend of mine was also enrolled in school. And we found this room off of 6th Street on a sleeping porch. And of course, 46 was a tough winter. And a sleeping porch was a cold bedroom. We had to go through the house to the bathroom. And the two of us remember, and we still talk about, we came in one night with snow on our shoes, got up the next morning, and they were frozen to the floor. So we stayed there till we placed the Sig House. And then we lived in this SAE house for a semester. And we roped out at the fairgrounds. As Clem said, he brought 2 calves. Well, that meant we had 2 calves that we might get to run once. Our practice sessions were mostly at somebody's jackpot at Yale, Perkins, or wherever there was an arena and they were having a jackpot. Well, you know, the 50-cent jackpot was our practice. Mm-hmm. And normally it cost $1 because whoever owned the calves got 50 cents of the dollar. So anyway, this group, all of us wanted to rope. And we either knew each other or we had known of each other for years before, but we started gluing together. And then my memory of hearing about the rodeo at Cameron College, the college rodeo, we knew that there were college rodeos and college cowboys, but no one at OSU was very interested in having a college rodeo cowboys. Not interested is not really severe enough. They didn't want. So we managed to go to this first one. And we managed to win the whole thing against, I think the article said there were 12 other colleges there. And they were all wound up to be pretty good cowboys, some of them in the PRCA or RCA or the Turtles at that time. And so we managed to get our roping not out of our system, but to get to rope and go to school. And anyway, that worked through the college years. Harold and Clem left. Turner and Leo and I. Bud Rigger was still there. I would like to have Clem talked a little bit more about Bud Rigger, because Bud Rigger was kind of fascinating, and he was from a rodeo family. That's all his family knew. And I don't know enough to talk about Bud, but he was capable of, he could rope, he could bulldog, he could ride bareback horses, he could ride saddlebox, he could ride bulls. Not a champion in any of them, but he could handle all of them. And actually made his living as being a rodeo clown. And so that was rather impressive, meeting Bud Rigger, but he was also very mouthy. And you weren't ever sure what he was going to say. But and Clem left out the part that was kind of interesting about this Cameron rodeo. We understood the more events you could enter, the more points you would get. I don't know why it didn't dawn on us that you had to win the event to get the points. But we thought if 5 of us went and we all entered 3 events, we'd start out ahead of the game. Well, they talked me and Leo into entering the bareback riding, which was really the highlight of my experience there, other than I actually won a go-around, and I won a second to go around the calf roping. But the highlight of the whole rodeo was when they put me on a bareback horse. And I remember it as though it were yesterday, but Jiggs Burke was there, who was a brother of the Burke brothers. Clyde was a world champion calf roper. Dave was a good steer roper. Jiggs was a good steer roper, and they were all characters. Clyde was a sensible one. But anyway, they lived at Ducking. And Jiggs was there helping at the shoots. And they put me on this bareback horse, and they said, well, which hand do you ride with? And I said, I don't know. Which one should I ride with? And so one of them said, well, if you're right-handed, you ought to ride with your left, keep your balance with your right. Okay, I'll ride with my left hand. So they kept asking me questions. Where'd I want the rigging? Well, I don't know. And they asked me about 8 questions, and I didn't know the answer. And finally, they got down to the question, are you ready? And Dee said, hell, he don't know. Open the gate. So they opened the gate, and I made about 1 jump. And I'm a relaxed person anyway. I had a good hold, but nothing else was tight. And I wound up a hold of the rigging with my feet on the horse's hip. And I knew this was a bad position, so I turned loose of my handhold and did a flip, and landed on my feet, and thought, well, I saved my life. So that was the end of my bareback riding. And I don't know, generally it was the the friendship that was made, you've heard the stories and the rest of the stories. And Turner and Harold, well, see, I can't figure out which one I could consider one of my closest friends. So I'll just accept all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Harold, Leo was the nearest one to my age. Then Harold was older, Clem was older, Bud was older, Turner was a little older. Turner and I rodeoed together because we did not ever go professionally. We went to the small rodeos close to home.
Mm-hmm.
And so Turner and I saw a lot of each other during the 50s. And then, as I mentioned, I think, if I remember correctly, I was 29 when I tied a calf in 10-3. And I was normally a 14 to 17 second calf roper. And I tied a calf in 10-3 and thought, George, that's the fastest I ever tied a calf. And I wound up with splitting a third. And that meant there were several people who had tied as fast or faster than I had. And I thought, I'm not going to get any better than that. So I complained about getting old and turning 30. And I had such a group of close friends that they got tired of listening to me crying about getting old. And they, behind my back, planned and executed a funeral for my youth. They had a policeman who was a friend escort them with the procession. They had borrowed a casket from one of the funeral homes. And they wore their black clothes and brought their folding chairs. And the policeman sounded a siren, stopped in front of the house with the light flashing. He runs up to the door and opens it, takes his hat off, and I'm not there. He doesn't speak, he doesn't look, he looks straight ahead.
Mm-hmm.
They came in the house, no one speaks to me. They open their folding chairs, they carry the casket in, opened the casket. Inside, they had my boots, my hat, my Larry robe, the Playboy magazine, and they all claim a little bit of horsemanship. I don't think there was. And then they preached a sermon. We still have the sermon in the scrapbook, and it was classic. And they haven't spoke to me yet, but I never complained about my age.
Oh, that's a good story. Well, let me hear a little bit more about your years at Oklahoma A&M College. Any professors stand out in your mind that you had?
My first year, it was in animal husbandry, and I felt like that. That's what I wanted. But there really no future unless I had a ranch. Every pencil you could put on paper, you could not buy land and cattle and make them pay off. If you had a college education, you could go to work for somebody. I didn't think about the old established ranches, but I also knew that I was going to get married.
Mm-hmm.
I also knew that my wife was not a country girl, and I better change schools. And two people stand out in my mind, and Glenn Bratcher was one of them, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
He referred to my roping horse as the Birchin in the proper manner.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of fun with him. And he was the first one that I knew. And for the rest of them that I had, Dr. Swearingen, who wound up coming to Tulsa and being president of one of the banks and a leading citizen here. He was the other excellent professor that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of it's just kind of a blur. I was not a good student. I did have an experience that was a little bit frightening. I still hauled a horse back and forth when I went home. I remember one time I had the horse loaded in the trailer, the car loaded with the wife and the child. This had to be 49. And we were leaving, and a police car drives up with a warrant for my arrest for a bad check. And I had not written a bad check. That's no one ever has.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I tell you, can you go with me for a little while? Or I'm asking you to go with me. And I said, well, of course. We can straighten this out. So he took me to the store, which was a furniture store and kind of an antique store on 6th Street, east of Washington. Washington's the north-south street.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady there, I remember the name of the store for years. I walked in and he said, is this the man who gave you the check? She said, no. I could have kissed her.
Mm-hmm.
That lady went through the yearbook and found the face and showed it to the man.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the person they were looking for. That was a little bit frightening.
Mm-hmm. It would be. Did you ever try your hand at any other rodeo events besides that one time?
No, I love cat roping calves and I love bulldogging.
Mm-hmm.
I was a high school wrestler and I felt like that helped me with bulldogging.
Mm-hmm. Where did you go to high school?
Tulsa Central.
Mm-hmm.
I was third in the state champion, but I should have been first.
What weight class did you wrestle?
That weight class for the state meet was 138.
Mm-hmm.
I had been wrestling 145, and coach wanted me to go down a weight.
Mm-hmm. So was wrestling a big sport at OAMC when you were there?
I went over, and it was a lot different than Coach Griffith was different than Coach Berry. Coach Berry was my high school coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out of the Navy. I jumped from my normal weight, which was around 145 to 150. I came out of the Navy weighing 175. I went over and worked out about 3 times with him and thought I'd rather rope calves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did. And, we think about that roping calves and how little we got to practice. These boys that are champions today, they're probably, some of them are roping 50 or 100 head a day.
Mm-hmm.
And we never had that much practice. I wanted you to ask Clem about the goat roping. We went to Clem's one time to gather goats to rope. And I think they had about 50 goats, and there was a big bluff. They were on the pasture above this bluff, and then it was all brush. And we started trying to gather goats. And I think we got to the pen with maybe 10 of them. But that didn't bother us. All we wanted to do was rope.
Mm-hmm. Did Mr. McSpadden told the story about signing the form so that you all could enter the Cameron Rodeo? Did you all have to do that several times that way?
I understand. I'm either naive or they tried to keep the truth from me. I actually understood that Bud and someone else were taking a photography course. And they talked the instructor into signing the forms.
Mm-hmm.
I will bow to Clem's memory.
Mm-hmm.
because Clem and Bud were kind of in charge of it. And if that's how it happened, well, that's probably how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always been somewhat naive about some things.
Did you have transportation when you were in college?
Very fortunate. I had a car and I had a trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And,
What kind of car did you have?
well, I had a 41 Ford for the first couple of years. And then I got a new Ford. And Turner and I were the ones that had the cars. And we both had 2-horse trailers.
And so those cars would pull the trailers. That's unusual these days, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. Well, pickups weren't very comfortable.
Oh, mm-hmm. Were they mainly just for farm and work?
Mainly for work.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we had Henrietta trailers, which were made by a man in Henrietta named Red Holmes.
Hmm.
His daughter was a trick rider. And he made these horse trailers, and they were stout and heavy. You know, if you didn't use the stand when you unhooked from it, you better get a car jack out to raise it up.
Oh.
I remember Turner impressed me by being able to lift his up. And I strained enough till I could lift mine, but I tried to remember to put brakes under. And there were no ball hitches at that time. They had the flat hitch and you dropped a pin down through the hole. And that always worked kind of all the time while you were traveling. And the springs on the back of cars were not good enough to hold. So you were driving about like this most of the time, unless you put overload springs on the back of the car.
Hmm.
It was interesting times.
Do you have any stories about your teammates on the rodeo team?
Oh, Turner told one of the worst ones. I was hazing for Harold at Kansas State. And he was bulldogging. And I didn't recall that the steer went over the pitcher's mound, but I assume he did. For some reason, when Harold got out on the steer, he rode over the steer right in my path. And everybody claimed that every foot on my horse hit him at least once. And he was riding with Turner. And we drove home that night, which meant we drove all night. And when we got there, he told Harold to get out and open the gate. Well, Harold so sore that he could not navigate. Of course, Turner convinced him he better move or he'd never be able to. Well, he got out and he fell down the bar ditch.
Oh.
And Turner started laughing so hard. Harold trying to get up. And we all got there at about the same time. And we all were so exhausted. And poor Harold was hurting. And it was a horrible experience. We did take him to with the sick bays.
Infirmary?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the infirmary the next
Mhm.
morning. And they x-rayed him and figured out that he was just kind of bruised and banged up.
Oh.
But that was the worst experience that we had. And I ran over him, but
Oh.
I didn't do it on purpose.
No. Accidents do happen around livestock.
But I
Sure.
couldn't afford to go to the rest of them. The big one was going to be in California in 1949, I think, when Eldon Dudley got there. And we had several more. But Eldon went out there and won everything they had, every rope and go around, I understand.
Eldon, who?
Dudley.
Dudley.
And it was just a wonderful period. But the greatest part about it is the guys that we've all talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been that close all of our lives. And I've even got to sing old gal I married.
How do you feel about Oklahoma State University and the impact it had on your life?
I couldn't have gone to any other school. I couldn't have handled a social life. I was not a good fraternity man. Our fraternity we were each other,
mm-hmm.
where it should have been the fraternity people. I had some good friends and still have.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've often jokingly talked about my relatives who went to OU. I had some gates on the place that, everybody has gates if they've got any land at all. Some of them are just like you want them, and some of them are just gates or gaps. But these kids that went to OU, they spend 10 minutes going through the gate. And then when they closed it, they wouldn't close it right. And I let each one of them know that I wish they'd just gone one semester to Oklahoma A&M and learned how to close gates.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still kind of a big joke with everybody. But I doubt if there was any other schools that had as much mud as we had. And looking back, you get a lot of experience driving through mud.
Oh, well, what is it about rodeo you think that bonds people together?
I hope it's happening today. I think they're too money mad today to be able to spend the time really bonding. That's just the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Money was important to us. And I guess mainly we didn't have any, but if we had any, we knew how to spend it and enjoy it. And I look back and think I should have been a bit wiser about it. But today, I think money is overtaken most everything. And that bothers me. I hate to see it happen. I watched it take over American Quarter Horse Association. They quit promoting the quarter horses and everybody's self-promoting. That's an opinion. I'm not sure you want opinions.
Opinions are fine. That's fine. Well, it's close to 4:00. Is there anything else you want to say about the rodeo team or about your friends from?
I think it's all been said. I still think they're the
Oklahoma.
greatest people on earth. And when it boils down to just me and Clem being left, it really gets a little tough at times.
Mm-hmm.
But faith gets us through this world, and we better keep it.
Yes, that's true. Well, I appreciate your participation in this project and the opportunity to interview you. This has been very nice and a privilege, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate it. My oldest daughter did graduate from OSU.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, because Patsy got pregnant, she didn't get to finish school. And the oldest daughter, when she graduated, she stepped out away from the procession and pointed at her mama.
Oh.
Because she felt like it was her fault that her mama didn't get there.
Oh. Well, I bet that made you both proud she.
And she's still making us proud.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
She majored in child development, and she has directed the child care center at St. John's Hospital. She's been there for almost 30 some years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so she used her education.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing your stories.
I hope it's worthwhile, dear.
Yes, sir.